If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The iron gate opened with a prolonged creak, revealing a cobbled path that led to an imposing mansion in the heart of the Lakeshore district, one of London's most noble neighborhoods. Mary Ann Peterson clutched the strap of her worn canvas bag tighter, feeling the weight of anxiety squeeze her chest like a vice. Her hands trembled slightly, and she had to take 3 deep breaths before she could take the first step. She had been looking for work for almost 6 months. 6 months knocking on door after door, sending resumes to every corner of the city, filling out online forms until the early hours of the morning, hearing no after no, feeling hope dwindling a little more each day. The hospital bill where her mother was undergoing cancer treatment grew every week like an uncontrollable snowball. Mrs. Celia Peterson needed expensive medicines, chemotherapy sessions, constant exams. The NHS covered some, but only some. The rest came out of pocket, and Mary Ann's pocket had been empty for too long. Her last job had been as an attendant in a downtown diner, but the establishment closed its doors after the owner went into debt. Before that, she worked in a clothing store that went bankrupt, and before that, in a daycare that cut staff. It seemed bad luck pursued her, or perhaps it was just the reflection of a country in crisis, where every day was a struggle to survive. That nanny vacancy was her last hope. The employment agency had called 2 days earlier, the attendant's voice sounding almost skeptical as she said there was a family urgently looking for someone, a mansion in the Lakeshore district, above average salary, accommodation included. It seemed too good to be true, and Mary Ann had learned the hard way that things that were too good often hid some problem. But she couldn't afford to be picky. She couldn't fail. She couldn't disappoint her mother, who had already sacrificed so much for her. She took another deep breath, smoothed the simple navy blue dress she had ironed 3 times the night before until not a single wrinkle remained, adjusted her brown hair tied in a discreet bun, and walked towards the main door with steps that tried to convey a confidence she didn't feel. The house was even more impressive up close than it looked from the gate. 3 floors of modern and imposing architecture with straight and elegant lines, huge smoked glass windows that reflected the blue September morning sky, an impeccable garden with perfectly trimmed lawns, rose bushes arranged in symmetrical beds, a stone fountain in the center that gushed crystal clear water. It looked like a movie set, one of those American films about rich, perfect families. Mary Ann had never been to a place like this. She grew up in the East End, on the outskirts where houses crammed against each other like carelessly stacked matchboxes, where silence was an unknown luxury, replaced by the constant noise of televisions on, children playing in the streets, motorcycles passing, dogs barking, street vendors shouting their offers. Here in that rich neighborhood, the silence was almost deafening. There was no traffic noise, despite being in London. There was no music escaping through the windows. There were no voices. Here, in that part of London reserved for those with a lot of money, the silence was oppressive, almost unnatural. It was as if wealth had the power to stifle even the sounds of life. There were no barking dogs running through the garden, no children's voices playing on the swing, no music escaping through open windows on a beautiful spring day. It was as if the house was empty, abandoned, even though Mary Ann knew it wasn't. The agency had confirmed that the family was home waiting for her. She rang the doorbell, and the sound echoed from within, musical and sophisticated, nothing like the shrill doorbells of the apartments she knew. She waited, nervously adjusting her brown hair tied in a simple bun, smoothing her dress once more, which suddenly seemed even cheaper and more inadequate. The main door was enormous, made of dark carved wood, with golden handles that shone under the sun. It must have cost more than everything Mary Ann owned combined. The door opened almost immediately, as if someone was waiting on the other side, watching through a security camera. The woman who appeared in the doorway was the complete opposite of Mary Ann in every possible way. Tall, she must have been about 5 feet 9 inches, while Mary Ann barely passed 5 feet 3 inches. Elegant, wearing a beige tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months' rent in the cramped apartment where Mary Ann lived with her mother. The fabric was fine, expensive, falling perfectly on her slender, well-maintained body. Her blonde hair fell in soft, perfectly arranged waves over her shoulders, professionally dyed in a shade that looked natural but clearly wasn't. Her makeup was impeccable, discreet but present, enhancing her blue eyes that now analyzed Mary Ann from head to toe with a coldness that made the young woman feel even smaller and more inadequate than she already felt. Those blue eyes swept over Mary Ann with impressive speed, absorbing every detail. The simple dress, the old bag, the worn shoes, the unprofessional haircut, the short, unpolished nails. And Mary Ann saw on the woman's face that expression she knew all too well, that mix of disdain and superiority that the rich sometimes directed at the poor, as if poverty were a choice, a character flaw, something contagious that needed to be kept at a distance. "You're the young woman from the agency," the woman said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Her voice was controlled, polite on the surface, with that posh London accent of the upper classes. But there was something underneath that Mary Ann couldn't immediately identify, something hard, something calculated, something false. "Yes, ma'am," Mary Ann replied, forcing her voice to come out firm despite the nervousness that made her stomach churn. "Mary Ann Peterson, I'm here for the nanny position interview." The woman didn't introduce herself. She didn't extend a hand to greet. She didn't smile. She just moved away from the door, making a brief, impatient gesture with her perfectly manicured hand for Mary Ann to enter. The woman's high heels echoed on the marble floor as she walked ahead, without looking back, as if she already expected Mary Ann to follow without needing further instructions. The interior of the house was even more luxurious and intimidating than the exterior. The entrance hall was enormous, with an extremely high ceiling that created a feeling of almost claustrophobic spaciousness. White marble on the floor, polished until it shone like a mirror. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, expensive and heavy, reflecting light in 1,000 directions. Works of art on the walls, abstract paintings in gilded frames that Mary Ann didn't have enough knowledge to identify, but that were clearly expensive. A wide curved staircase ascended to the second floor, with an artistically wrought iron handrail. Everything shone, everything was perfectly in its place, each object positioned with millimeter precision, each surface impeccably clean. But something was missing. Mary Ann felt it immediately, even without being able to put it into words. Life was missing, warmth was missing, that comfortable chaos that makes a house a home was missing. There were no shoes left by the entrance, no jackets carelessly hung, no magazines scattered on the coffee table, no smell of food coming from the kitchen. It was like entering a museum after hours, or a luxury furniture store where everything is beautiful but nothing is real. "My name is Helen," the woman finally said, walking through the wide corridors without slowing her pace, forcing Mary Ann to almost run to keep up. "I am the wife of Mr. Edward Miller, owner of this house. We married 2 years ago. You will take care of his stepson, Michael, 7 years old." Stepson. The word confirmed what Mary Ann already suspected. Son from a previous marriage, son of another woman. She tried to process the information quickly, mentally preparing the questions good nanny should ask, the important things she needed to know about the child's routine, his tastes, his needs, his personality. But before she could open her mouth to ask any of those questions, Helen continued speaking, and her tone of voice changed. It became lower, denser, laden with something that made Mary Ann feel an uncomfortable shiver run up her spine. "Michael is a special child," Helen said, and there was something in the way she pronounced the word special that sounded wrong, almost like an insult disguised as a euphemism. They stopped before a white door on the second floor at the end of a silent, empty corridor. "He has very specific needs, quite delicate health problems. He requires constant care, strict medication at exact times, absolute rest. He cannot be agitated in any way. He cannot run. He cannot play too actively. He cannot have strong or intense emotions. Understood?" Mary Ann nodded, but a stab of worry pierced her chest like a sharp knife. What kind of illness or condition could a child of only 7 have that required all that? Absolute rest, no playing, no emotions. That didn't seem normal, didn't seem healthy. Children needed to run, jump, shout, laugh, cry, live. But she said nothing. She couldn't risk losing the job before it even started. Her mother needed her. The promised salary was good. It had to work out. Helen turned the golden doorknob and opened the door slowly, revealing a large, spacious room, decorated in cool shades of light blue and white. There was a huge king-size bed in the center, with impeccable white sheets and a perfectly stretched blue quilt. A modern bookshelf occupied one wall, but there were few books on it, and those that were there seemed organized by color, and size more as decoration than for reading. A light wood desk was empty. No pencils, no notebooks, no clutter. A white armchair in the corner, also empty. Large windows with light blue curtains that let in filtered light. But what most caught Mary Ann's attention, what made her heart ache painfully, was the absolute absence of childhood in that space. There were no toys scattered on the floor waiting to be carelessly stepped on. No children's drawings taped to the walls. No colorful posters of superheroes or cartoon characters. No abandoned cars on the rug. Building blocks scattered, stuffed. Animals squashed by love and constant use. There was no life. It was an impeccable room organized with aseptic, almost hospital-like perfection. It didn't look like a child's room. It looked like a museum dedicated to the idea of childhood, but with no real child inhabiting it. And then she saw him, and Mary Ann's heart broke a little. Sitting on the enormous bed, which seemed even larger because of his small size, huddled against a pile of white pillows as if trying to disappear among them, was a boy so small and fragile that he looked more like 5 years old than 7, pale with a pallor that wasn't natural, that didn't just come from a lack of sun but from something deeper, more worrying. Dark brown hair, straight, falling lifelessly over his forehead, sunken eyes, with dark circles underneath that no child should have, eyes that seemed too big for his thin, small face. His arms, thin as twigs, rested on his lap, his small, pale hands quiet, useless, as if he didn't know what to do with them, as if he had forgotten what they were for. He wore blue and white striped pajamas too large for his skeletal body, and was sitting in a strange, rigid way as if afraid to move, afraid to occupy more space than absolutely necessary. When he saw the 2 women enter the room, he didn't smile. He didn't move. He showed no curiosity or excitement, as any normal child would upon seeing a new person. He just looked, with an empty, blank, absent expression that broke Mary Ann's heart into small, sharp pieces. "Michael," Helen said, and her voice sounded even more controlled, even more mechanical, as if she were reading a rehearsed script. "This is Mary Ann. She will take care of you from now on. Be polite." The boy nodded slightly, a movement so small and weak it was barely noticeable, but said nothing. His thin lips remained closed. His large, tired eyes just watched, without sparkle, without curiosity, without life. Mary Ann felt a wave of compassion so strong that she had to swallow hard to avoid showing too much emotion in front of Helen. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. No child should look so blank, so absent, so hopeless. Mary Ann approached slowly, careful not to startle the boy, and crouched beside the bed to be exactly at his eye level, on the same line of sight, showing respect and equality. "Hello, Michael. It's a pleasure to meet you," she said in the softest, gentlest voice she could produce. "I'm Mary Ann. Can I call you Mike, or do you prefer Michael?" It was as if a tiny spark had been lit somewhere very deep within those tired eyes. Something gleamed there for a second, so fast that Mary Ann almost thought she had imagined it. A small, almost imperceptible spark. But it was there, it was there. Proof that there was still life, hidden. Suffocated, but still alive. The boy quickly looked at Helen as if asking permission to answer, as if afraid to say the wrong thing, and then turned his gaze back to Mary Ann. "You can call me Mike," he finally replied, in a thin, hoarse, tired voice, as if speaking required too much effort. But there was something there too, a tiny bit of pleasure, perhaps, of being treated with kindness, of being seen as a person, not a patient. Mary Ann smiled, a genuine, warm smile that she hoped conveyed all the kindness and willingness to help that she felt. "All right, Mike. We're going to be great friends, you'll see." She extended her hand slowly, and the boy, after hesitating, touched his thin, cold fingers to hers. The child's hand was so small, so fragile, so cold that Mary Ann felt like crying. Helen cleared her throat loudly, an impatient sound that shattered the moment of connection like breaking glass. "Mary Ann, come with me now. I need to show you the medication routine and all the important medical instructions. Michael, you stay put. Don't leave the bed. Don't move. Just rest." Mary Ann slowly stood up, reluctant to break the contact, but obeyed. Before leaving, however, she cast one last look at the boy. Michael watched her with an intensity that didn't match the apathy and lethargy of the rest of his small, weak body at all. It was as if there were two people there. One in forced, controlled, sedated rest, and another trapped inside, wanting to get out, wanting to scream, wanting to live, but unable to break the invisible chains that bound him. In the wide, silent corridor, Helen handed Mary Ann a thick brown leather folder, heavy, full of papers meticulously organized in transparent plastic dividers. There were medical prescriptions printed on letterhead, handwritten notes in perfect script, schedules marked in colorful tables, detailed instructions on dosages and procedures. The list of medications was absurdly extensive. Anxiolytics with complicated names that Mary Ann could barely pronounce, heavy tranquilizers, medications to induce sleep, medicines to control anxiety, to prevent panic attacks, to stabilize mood, to reduce agitation, all prescribed by a doctor whose name Mary Ann didn't recognize, Dr. Arthur Davies, child psychiatrist, the stamp read. "He takes all this?" Mary Ann asked, flipping through the pages with growing concern and disbelief. The quantity was frightening. There were at least 8 different medications, some taken 3 times a day, others twice, some only once, but in high doses. How could a 7-year-old child swallow so many pills? How did his small body process so much chemistry? "Everything," Helen replied with absolute firmness, crossing her arms over her chest defensively. "At the exact times marked there, no delays, not even 5 minutes late. His health depends on it completely. Michael suffers from a severe and complex neurological condition, severe anxiety attacks that can lead to fainting, violent and dangerous emotional outbursts, episodes of total loss of control where he could hurt himself or others. If not medicated correctly, exactly as prescribed, there can be very serious consequences, very dangerous." Mary Ann frowned, confused. "But he seems so calm, so quiet. He doesn't seem like someone who has violent outbursts." "Exactly because he is being adequately medicated," Helen retorted quickly, perhaps too quickly. "That's why you need to follow the routine strictly. No questions, no changes." "But he's so small," Mary Ann insisted, unable to contain her overflowing concern. "Wouldn't it be better to try other approaches first? Behavioral therapy, more intensive psychological support, supervised physical activities, before so much heavy chemical medication?" Helen's gaze hardened in a way that made Mary Ann instinctively step back. Her blue eyes turned as cold as ice. "Are you a doctor, Mary Ann? Do you have training in pediatrics or child psychiatry? Did you study medicine at some university I don't know about?" "No, Ma'am," Mary Ann replied softly, feeling small and inadequate again. "Then follow the instructions given by those who have studied and understand the subject. Dr. Davies is one of London's best child psychiatrists. He works at a very expensive clinic. He knows exactly what he's doing. I know what I'm doing. Your role here is very clear and simple. Give the medicines at the right times, keep the boy calm and under control, and notify me immediately if there is any change in his behavior. Do you understand perfectly?" Mary Ann swallowed hard and nodded, but something within her, something visceral and instinctive, screamed loudly that it wasn't right, that no 7-year-old child should be taking that absurd amount of medication, that there was something profoundly wrong happening in that beautiful silent house. A 7-year-old child taking heavy psychiatric drugs, locked in a luxurious but empty room without toys, without life, without childhood, pale and weak as if slowly wasting away. None of it made sense. Helen continued explaining the daily routine with mechanical efficiency, as if reading an instruction manual to operate a machine, not care for a child. Michael should remain in his room most of the day. All day, in fact, except for meal times. He could come down to the dining room for breakfast, lunch and dinner, but always closely accompanied, always walking slowly, always in absolute silence. No lively conversations, no loud laughter, no intense emotions of any kind. After eating, he should immediately return to his room and lie down on the bed. And his father? Marianne asked, trying to understand the family dynamics. Mr. Edward. Does he spend much time with Michael? Helen hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Marianne noticed. Edward travels a lot for work. He manages companies, negotiates contracts, spends weeks away. When he's here, it's always late at night, and Michael is already asleep. She paused. It's better that way. The boy gets agitated when his father is around. That sounded strange. What child got agitated by their own father's presence? Marianne kept the question to herself, but made a mental note. There were many things that didn't make sense. You can start tomorrow, Helen said, indicating that the conversation was over. 6 a.m. Bring your things. You'll be living here. There's a maid's room on the 3rd floor. Salary will be deposited at the end of the month. Any questions? Marianne shook her head, despite having 1,000 questions. Helen was already walking away, her heels echoing on the marble floor, and Marianne stood there holding the medication folder, feeling the weight of something much bigger than a simple nanny job. She went back to Michael's room before leaving. She knocked lightly on the door and entered. The boy remained in the same position, but this time his eyes were closed. Mike, she called softly. He opened his eyes slowly, as if even that required effort. Marianne approached and sat on the edge of the bed. I'll be back tomorrow, okay? We'll get to know each other better. Do you like to draw? The boy looked at the empty desk and then at Marianne. I used to draw, but now but can't. Why? He shrugged, and the sadness in that gesture was so intense that Marianne felt her eyes sting. I get tired too quickly, and Aunt Helen says it's bad for me. Marianne gently squeezed the boy's small, cold hand. Let's see what we can do, agreed? I'll take care of you. For the first time, Michael managed something that could be a smile. It was faint, trembling, but it was there. And at that moment, Marianne made a silent decision. No matter what Helen said, no matter what was written in that folder full of medicines, something was profoundly wrong happening in that house, and she was going to find out what. When she left the mansion, the sun was already high, but the coldness in Marianne's chest had not diminished. She took the bus back to the East End, looking out the window without really seeing the landscape. She thought of the pale boy, the lifeless room, the eyes that pleaded for help, even without words. She thought of her sick mother waiting at home, dependent on the salary that job would bring. She thought of the responsibility she had just accepted. That night, as she prepared the simple dinner she would share with her mother, Marianne couldn't stop talking about Michael. Mrs. Celia Peterson, a 60-year-old woman bravely fighting her illness, listened attentively, frowning as her daughter described the situation. That much medicine isn't right, Marianne. Children need to play, they need to run, they need to live. What kind of illness requires so much medicine but no love? Marianne sighed, stirring the beans on the stove. I think it's strange too, Mum, but I need this job. The hospital is charging again. Mrs. Celia held her daughter's hand with the strength she still had left. You'll do the right thing, my dear, you always do, trust your heart. If something's wrong, you'll find out. That night Marianne barely slept. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about Michael, wondering what could be happening. At 3 a.m, she got up and went to the old computer in the living room. She researched the medications on the list, one by one, and what she discovered made her even more uneasy. Those medicines were too strong for a child. They were used in extreme cases in adults with severe disorders, and the combination of so many at once could cause precisely the symptoms Michael presented. Excessive drowsiness, apathy, weakness, lack of energy. Was the boy sick, or was he being made sick? The question echoed in Marianne's mind as she packed her bag the next day. She put aside simple clothes, a few books, a photo of her mother. She looked around the cramped little room where she had spent her entire life. It was humble, but it was full of love. The mansion she was going to was luxurious but empty. She got up early, said goodbye to her mother with a long hug, and took the first bus. When she arrived at the mansion, the gate was already open, as if they were waiting for her. Helen received her with the same coldness as the day before, showed her the small but comfortable room on the 3rd floor, and immediately took her to Michael. 6 in the morning, the boy was already awake, sitting on the bed, waiting. "Good morning, Mike," Mary Ann said with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Mary Ann," he replied, and this time the smile was a little wider. "Shall we have breakfast?" Helen interrupted, placing herself between the two. "First the morning medication, then breakfast, always in that order." Mary Ann picked up the tray that was on the desk. 5 different pills, a glass of water. She looked at Michael, who was already reaching out his hand with resignation, like someone accustomed to a painful routine. "Wait," Mary Ann said, holding the tray. "Shouldn't he eat something first? An empty stomach can be harmful." "The medicines are to be taken on an empty stomach," Helen replied impatiently. "Do as I say." Mary Ann hesitated, but obeyed. She watched Michael swallow. Each pill saw the grimace of disgust on his small face, noticed how he closed his eyes tightly, as if preparing for something bad. 15 minutes later at breakfast, the boy barely touched his food. He was too sleepy, too apathetic. He just pushed the bread and jam from one side of the plate to the other. Throughout the morning, Mary Ann stayed by his side, observing. Michael tried to talk, but the words came out slurred. He tried to sit up straight, but his body slid sideways. It was as if he was fighting against an invisible force that pulled him down into sleep, into emptiness. At noon, when Helen brought more medicines, Mary Ann couldn't take it anymore. "Can he skip this dose, just to see how he feels?" Helen glared at her. "Of course not. Do you want him to have a crisis? But he can barely stay awake. That's how it has to be, calm, controlled, without risks." Mary Ann gave him the medicines again, but the knot in her stomach tightened more and more. In the afternoon, Michael slept deeply, a heavy, artificial sleep. Mary Ann took the opportunity to explore the room more carefully. She opened drawers, looked inside the closet, searched for something that could explain the situation. And then, as she bent down to pick up a pencil that had fallen behind the bed, she saw it. A shoebox pushed under the mattress, almost invisible. She slowly pulled out the box, looked at the door to make sure she was alone, and opened it. Inside were vials, many vials, all empty, and the labels were different from the ones she was giving the boy. Some didn't even have labels. Others had names Mary Ann didn't recognize. Her heart pounded. What was this? Why were they hidden? She quickly put the box away when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Helen entered without knocking, as always, and looked around suspiciously. "Is everything all right here?" "Yes, ma'am. Michael is sleeping." Helen approached the bed, looked at the boy with an expression Mary Ann couldn't decipher. It wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was something cold, calculated, almost possessive. "Good. Let him rest. Don't wake him." And she left, leaving Mary Ann alone again with her suspicions and her fears. That night, in the small room on the 3rd floor, Mary Ann couldn't sleep. She thought of the hidden vials, the absurd amount of medication, the boy who could barely stay awake. Something was very, very wrong, and she had only just begun to scratch the surface. She decided that the next day she would observe everything even more carefully. Every movement of Helen, every reaction of Michael, every detail that could reveal the truth. Because now Mary Ann was sure. It wasn't just a job, it was a mission, and Michael needed her more than anyone else in her life ever had. Dawn arrived with a faint silvery light that barely penetrated the thick, dark fabric curtains of the small room where Mary Ann had spent the night almost sleepless. She had slept perhaps 2 hours at most, in short, agitated intervals, waking up at every sound coming from the rest of the silent house. The sounds were strange, distant, echoes of footsteps in empty corridors, the creak of a door closing somewhere on the 2nd floor, the wind hitting against the large windows. Every sound made her sit up in bed, alert, her heart racing, thinking that perhaps it was Helen coming to check if she was really in her room, if she wasn't snooping where she shouldn't. The image of the empty vials hidden under Michael's bed wouldn't leave her head, projecting itself into the darkness of the room every time Mary Ann closed her eyes. Why would someone hide empty medicine vials under a child's mattress? If they were just the boy's old medications, the previous vials that had already been consumed, why not simply throw them away in the regular trash like any normal person would? Why hide them so carefully, pushing the box to the back, where no one would see unless they were specifically looking? And why were the labels different, some even completely blank, without any identification? None of it made sense within the logic of a legitimate and transparent medical treatment. The questions spun endlessly within Mary Ann's exhausted mind, like an incessant and torturous carousel, as she got out of the narrow bed when the cheap digital clock showed 5:15 in the morning. She took a quick, scalding shower in the tiny bathroom attached to the room, letting the hot water fall over her tense shoulders, trying to relieve the stiffness of muscles contracted by tension and a sleepless night. The water helped, a little, but it couldn't dissolve the deep and growing concern that squeezed her chest like an increasingly tightening vice. She dressed in simple, faded jeans, worn by use and many washes, and a long-sleeved white blouse that had seen better days. She tied her brown hair back into the practical plain bun that had become her standard hairstyle since arriving at that house. She quickly looked at herself in the small, foggy mirror above the sink, seeing a young woman with deep, dark circles, red eyes from fatigue, a worried expression. She looked like she had aged 5 years in just 3 days. She sighed deeply, adjusted her blouse, and quietly went downstairs, treading lightly on the edges of the wooden steps to prevent them from creaking and announcing her presence. It was 5:30 in the morning when she reached the ground floor. The house was plunged into gloom and oppressive quiet, as if it were a living organism that still slept deeply and did not want to be disturbed. The heavy curtains in all the rooms were closed, blocking the faint light of dawn that tried to enter. The chandeliers were off. The silence was so complete that Mary Ann could hear her own heart beating, blood rushing through her veins, breath entering and leaving her lungs. It was an unnatural, heavy silence, which seemed to have physical substance, as if it could be touched. In the huge, modern kitchen, fully equipped with state-of-the-art stainless steel appliances that Mary Ann barely knew how to operate, a kitchen that looked like it came straight out of a luxury decor magazine, she found the maid she hadn't seen the day before. She was a middle-aged woman, perhaps in her 50s, short and plump with grey hair tied in a loose, awkward ponytail. She wore a simple navy blue uniform with a white apron and prepared coffee with efficient, mechanical movements, as if she had been doing it for years without ever stopping to think. Upon seeing Mary Ann enter the kitchen, the woman merely nodded her head in a silent, unenthusiastic greeting. She didn't smile. She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask how Mary Ann was or if she had slept well. She simply returned to what she was doing, stirring the coffee in the expensive Italian coffee maker, taking fresh bread from a paper bag, arranging everything on the large marble table with mathematical precision. Silence seemed to be the absolute and unbreakable rule in that house. Even the employees spoke little, or rather, didn't speak at all, as if they had strict and threatening orders not to make noise, not to disturb the sepulchral and morbid peace that hung over all the rooms like a heavy cloud. Mary Ann poured herself a cup of strong, bitter black coffee, without sugar, and stood there by the enormous counter, looking out the giant window that overlooked the impeccable garden at the back of the mansion. The roses swayed gently in the cold September morning breeze, their red and pink petals trembling as if cold. The lawn was green and perfectly manicured, not a single dry leaf out of place, not a broken branch, no imperfections. Everything was too perfect, too artificial. The sun began to appear on the distant horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold, promising a beautiful spring day. But Mary Ann couldn't appreciate the natural beauty unfolding before her eyes. Her mind was too busy, running in frantic, exhausted circles, trying to piece together an impossible puzzle that still had many missing pieces, essential pieces without which the complete picture made no sense. At 6 o'clock sharp, as agreed, she went up to Michael's room. She knocked lightly on the door before entering, a courtesy Helen had never shown. The boy's thin voice replied, a come in so soft it was barely heard. Mary Ann opened the door, and found him exactly as the morning before. Sitting on the enormous bed, huddled against the pillows, pale, with deep, dark circles, wearing the same striped pajamas that seemed never to leave his small body. But this time when his eyes met hers, there was something different, a tiny glint, a spark of joy perhaps, of relief, as if Mary Ann's presence was the only good thing in that cold, silent place. "Good morning, Mike," Mary Ann said, approaching with a genuine smile that came from the bottom of her heart. "Did you sleep well?" The boy shrugged a small, tired gesture. "I always sleep a lot. I don't know if it's well. I just sleep." The sincerity of that answer broke Mary Ann's heart into even smaller pieces. A 7-year-old child shouldn't speak like that, with that resignation, that absence of energy, that passive acceptance of a lifeless life. "Today we're going to try to do different things, okay? Let's see if you like to draw or tell stories. Do you like stories?" For the first time, something genuinely resembling interest crossed Michael's pale face. His eyes widened a little. "I used to. Before, when my mum still lived here. She used to tell me stories every night before I went to sleep, stories of dragons and knights and brave princesses." His voice faltered at the end, laden with a longing so deep it was almost palpable. "And where is your mother now?" Mary Ann asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. Michael lowered his eyes, looking at his own small, pale hands. "She left. After Daddy married Aunt Helen. Aunt Helen said my mum didn't want me anymore, that she went far away and will never come back. But I don't know if I believe that. My mom loved me, she told me every day." Mary Ann felt the anger swell within her chest, like a hot, fierce wave. What kind of person would say something like that to a child? What kind of cruelty was that? "I'm sure your mother loves you very much, Mike. Sometimes things get complicated between adults, but that doesn't mean she abandoned you. Maybe she's just away for now." "Do you really think so?" "I do. Mothers don't stop loving their children. Never." The boy smiled, and it was a small, fragile smile, but true. For the first time, Mary Ann saw a piece of the child Michael should be, hidden under layers of medication and sadness. Then the door burst open abruptly, without warning, and Helen entered like a cold gust. She was impeccable as always, this time wearing a grey suit that perfectly matched her high heels, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves, her makeup applied with millimeter precision. "Time for medication," she announced in that cold, controlled voice, placing a tray on the desk. 5 colourful pills, 2 glasses of water. Mary Ann stood up, picked up the tray, and looked at the pills with renewed attention. After discovering the hidden vials, every medicine seemed suspicious. Every dose seemed excessive. "Mrs. Helen," she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral and professional, "could I speak with the doctor who prescribed these medications, just to better understand the treatment, to be able to take care of Michael in the best possible way?" Helen's gaze hardened instantly. Her blue eyes turned as cold as a frozen lake. "There's no need. I've already explained everything you need to know. Your job is not to question the treatment, it's just to follow the instructions. Dr. Davies is extremely busy and doesn't have time to talk to nannies." The word nannies was pronounced with such evident disdain that Mary Ann felt her face flush with humiliation. But she swallowed her anger, swallowed her pride, because she knew she needed to stay there. She needed to discover the truth. She needed to help Michael. "Sorry, ma'am. It was just professional curiosity." Helen didn't reply. She just looked at Michael with that cold, empty expression, then left the room, leaving behind only the sound of her heels echoing down the corridor. Mary Ann stood there holding the tray, looking at the pills, and made a decision she knew was risky but necessary. She couldn't continue giving that absurd amount of medication without at least trying to understand what was happening. "Mike," she said softly, approaching the bed, "do you trust me?" The boy looked at her with those large, tired eyes and nodded slowly. "I do. You're nice. Different from Aunt Helen. I'm going to give you the medicines, but maybe not all of them. Just some. And I want you to tell me how you feel afterwards. Can it be our secret? But you can't tell Aunt Helen. Because she might send me away and I don't want to leave without helping you first. Can you keep a secret? Michael nodded again, and there was something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Hope. A tiny spark of hope. I can. I promise. Mary. Anne looked at the closed door, made sure she was alone, and then, with slightly trembling hands, separated 3 of the 5 pills. The other 2, which her research the night before had shown to be the heaviest, the strongest anxiolytics, she quickly hid in her pants pocket. She gave the remaining 3 to Michael, who swallowed them with water, making the same grimace of disgust. They went down for breakfast half an hour later, and Mary Ann carefully observed every reaction of the boy. He was still sleepy, still shuffled his feet, but perhaps, just perhaps, a little less than the day before. He ate 2 bites of bread and jam instead of just pushing the food around his plate. This was already a small but significant progress. During the morning, while they were in the room, Mary Ann tried to engage Michael in gentle activities. She picked up some of the books that were perfectly organized on the shelf and began to read aloud. Children's adventure and fantasy stories. Michael listened attentively, lying on the bed, his eyes fixed on Mary Ann. From time to time he would ask a question or make a comment, and every word that came out of his small mouth was like a victory, a step in the right direction. At noon, when Helen brought the next dose of medication, Mary Ann repeated the process. This time, she hid 3 of the 5 pills and gave him only 2. Her heart beat so fast that she was sure Helen could hear it, but the woman didn't notice anything. She just watched Michael take the medicines, nodded with satisfaction, and left again. In the afternoon, while Michael should have been sleeping his usual heavy artificial sleep, something surprising happened. He didn't sleep deeply. He was sleepy, yes, but he didn't completely pass out. His eyes opened occasionally, looking around the room with a slow, confused curiosity, as if he were waking from a very long dream and beginning to remember what it was like to be truly awake. Mary Ann stood by the bed, just watching, her heart racing with a mix of fear and hope. What she was doing was risky. If Helen found out, she would be fired immediately, maybe even prosecuted for disobeying medical orders. But looking at that pale boy and realizing that he was reacting, that he was improving, that he was starting to look more alive, strengthened her conviction. Something was very wrong with those medications, very wrong with that whole treatment. The next day, Mary Ann was even bolder. She reduced the doses by half at all meals, and the result was even more impressive. Michael woke up earlier, sat up alone in bed without needing help, and when Mary Ann entered the room, he was looking out the window, watching the birds in the garden, something he hadn't done before. "Good morning, Mary Ann," he said, and his voice was a little stronger, a little clearer. "Good morning, Mike. How are you feeling today?" "Different, less tired. It's strange, but it's good." During breakfast, he ate half the bread and jam and drank all the orange juice. Small victories that made Mary Ann's heart sing with joy. Helen was in meetings most of the day, busy with her social engagements and appearances, so Mary Ann had more freedom to interact with Michael. They talked about many things, about the school he no longer attended, about the friends he had before he got sick, about the mother he still loved and missed every day. "I used to play football in the garden," Michael recounted, and his eyes shone with the memory. "With my dad, before he got married again, before I got sick. He taught me how to kick the ball and score goals. It was so much fun. Then, when Aunt Helen arrived, she said I couldn't play outside anymore, that the sun was bad for me, that I could have a crisis. And little by little everything stopped. School, friends, football, everything. Let's see if you can get better, okay? And who knows, soon you can go back to playing in the garden, but it has to be our secret for now. You can't tell Aunt Helen about the medicines, agreed?" "Agreed." On the 3rd day of reduced doses, something extraordinary happened. Michael asked to draw. Mary Ann found some colored pencils and sheets of paper in a forgotten drawer, and the boy, sitting on the bed with his legs crossed, began to draw with movements that were still slow but deliberate. He drew a house with a garden, trees, a huge yellow sun in the corner of the paper, and 2 small figures, a child and a woman with brown hair. "Who are they?" Mary Ann asked, feeling her eyes sting. "It's us, you and me in the garden, when I get better." Mary Ann had to turn away so Michael wouldn't see her cry. That simple drawing, made with trembling strokes and colors going outside the lines, was the most concrete proof she needed. Michael wasn't sick. He was being prevented from living. He was being imprisoned in his own body by medications he didn't need. That night, after Michael finally fell asleep around 9 o'clock, a lighter, more natural sleep this time, without the chemical weight of heavy sedation, without the slow, dragging movements of someone being forced to sleep against their will, Mary Ann returned to the small room on the 3rd floor and picked up her old cell phone, a simple device with a cracked screen that had seen better days. She didn't have many contacts saved in her sparse address book, but she had an important one, a name that shone like a light at the end of the tunnel. Robert Smith. A friend from school days, from high school they attended together in the East End, who had graduated in pharmacy from UCL after much effort and sacrifice. She looked at the clock. 10:30 at night. It was late. Robert was probably already asleep, or at least getting ready to sleep. But this couldn't wait until the next day. Every hour that passed was an hour Michael could be taking those terrible compounds. Every dose was an additional risk to the boy's fragile health. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and dialed the number with trembling fingers. The phone rang 4 long times before Robert's sleepy, confused voice answered on the other end of the line. "Hello, Mary Ann, is that you?" His voice was hoarse with sleep, slurred. "What time is it?" "Hi, Robert. I'm really sorry to call so late at night. I know you must be tired, but it's urgent, very urgent. I need your help. Professional. An analysis that only you can do. Can you analyze some medications for me, to see if they are really what their labels say they are?" There was a long pause on the other end. Mary Ann heard the sound of Robert moving, probably sitting up in bed, becoming more alert. When he spoke again, his voice was clearer, more focused, laden with concern. "Medications? What kind of medications exactly? And why do you think there might be something wrong with them? Child psychiatric medications, anxiolytics, sedatives, tranquilizers. It's for a 7-year-old child I'm taking care of here in a house where I work as a nanny. I have a very strong suspicion that something is wrong, very wrong. The child is being over-medicated and the symptoms don't match the diagnosis. The less medicine he takes, the better he gets. It's the opposite of what should be happening." Robert's voice became serious, professional, and Mary Ann imagined his face, his eyebrows furrowed, the concentrated expression he always had when something important was at stake. "Mary Ann, this is serious. If you're suggesting what I think you are, it could be a child abuse situation, poisoning. Can you bring samples of these medications? Without breaking any laws, of course. Do you have legal access to them?" "I do. They are the medicines I myself am administering. I can separate samples from 2 or 3 different vials and bring them to you tomorrow. Can you do analyses to see if the content matches what's described on the labels?" "Yes, I can. I work at a compounding pharmacy that has a small but equipped lab. I can do basic chemical composition analyses, identify the active ingredients, compare them with the formulas that should be there. It won't be as precise as a forensic lab, but it will give a good idea if there's adulteration or substitution. How long can you be out tomorrow?" "A few hours. I can invent that I need to deal with personal matters, go to the bank, things like that. The boss is controlling, but gave me leave in the contract to resolve external issues once a week. Then come here to the pharmacy tomorrow around 2 in the afternoon. It's in the center on Baker Street, number 342. Bring the samples well packaged, preferably in the original vials if possible. I'll ask my boss to let me use the lab, saying it's for a postgraduate academic project. The analysis takes about 3-4 hours. Can you wait or come back later to pick up the result?" "I'll wait. I need to know as soon as possible." "Thank you so much, Robert. You don't know how much this means to me, to this child." "You're welcome, Mary Ann, but listen, be very careful, okay? If this is really what you're thinking, if someone is deliberately drugging a child, you're dealing with dangerous people. People capable of very bad things. Don't expose yourself too much. Don't confront anyone until you're absolutely sure and have concrete evidence. And then go straight to the authorities. Don't try to solve it alone." "I know. I'll be careful. I promise." She hung up the phone and sat on the narrow bed for a long time, looking at her own hands that trembled slightly. What she was doing was dangerous. If Helen found out she was investigating, that she was collecting samples for analysis, that she was reducing medication doses without authorization, she would be fired on the spot. Maybe worse, maybe prosecuted, maybe threatened. But looking at that pale boy during the day, seeing his eyes slowly come alive as the medication decreased, hearing his little voice getting stronger, clearer, more present, seeing the first genuine smile appear on that thin face, all of this strengthened her conviction and dissolved her fear. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't abandon Michael. He depended on her, and she wasn't going to fail. The next day, the morning passed, in almost unbearable tension. Mary Ann gave Michael only a third of the prescribed doses, secretly hiding the rest of the pills in her pants pocket whenever Helen wasn't looking directly. The boy woke up earlier, sat up alone, asked to have breakfast in the kitchen instead of his room. Small victories that filled Mary Ann's heart with hope and also with anger. Anger at seeing how that child was being deliberately kept in a state of chemical lethargy, prevented from living, from growing, from being happy. At noon, Mary Ann informed Helen that she needed to leave to resolve urgent banking matters related to her mother's treatment. Helen frowned, clearly displeased, but couldn't deny it. It was in the contract. 1 free afternoon a week for personal matters. Just make sure you're back before 6. Michael needs to take his evening medication on time, and don't be late. I won't be late, Mum. Mary Ann quickly changed her clothes, grabbed her bag where she had hidden 2 of Michael's medication vials, carefully wrapped in tissue paper to prevent them from breaking, and left the mansion feeling the weight of those vials as if they were bombs about to explode. She took the crowded tube to central London, squeezed between dozens of tired, sweaty people returning from work or heading to an appointment. The journey lasted almost an hour, but it felt much longer, each minute dragging like an eternity. When she finally arrived at Baker Street, a narrow, bustling street in the old city centre, full of popular shops, street vendors, old Art Deco buildings that had seen better days, she found the compounding pharmacy where Robert worked. It was a medium-sized establishment, clean and organized, with shelves full of bottles and jars of medicines, a white counter where the pharmacists worked, a strong smell of alcohol and chemicals in the air. Robert greeted her with a quick but tight hug, and Mary Ann felt a wave of relief seeing her friend's face, his dark, sincere eyes, the small but comforting smile. He was wearing his white pharmacist's coat, his black hair messy as always, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Come, let's go to the back. Did you bring the samples?" "I did. Here." Mary Ann handed over the 2 wrapped vials, and Robert examined them carefully, reading the labels, shaking them lightly to hear the sound of the pills inside. "Okay, I'll do the full analysis. It will take a few hours, like I said. Do you want to wait here, or would you prefer to walk around and come back later?" "I'll stay. I can't do anything else until I know the result." "Can I wait in the small room there?" "Of course. Make yourself comfortable. There's coffee and water. If you need anything, just call me." Mary Ann spent the next few hours sitting on an uncomfortable plastic chair in the tiny back room of the pharmacy. She couldn't read the old magazine that was on the coffee table. She couldn't use her phone. She just sat there looking at the white, empty walls, listening to the distant noise of the pharmacy's activity, customers coming and going, pharmacists attending, preparing prescriptions, giving advice. Time dragged on torturously. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like an entire day. Finally, at 5:30 in the afternoon, when the sun was already beginning to set outside, painting the sky orange and purple, Robert appeared at the door of the small room. The expression on his face was grave, serious, worried. It wasn't the face of someone with good news to share. Mary Ann felt her stomach churn, her hands turn cold, her heart pound. "So?" she asked, her voice coming out weak and trembling. Robert entered, closed the door behind him for privacy, and sat in the chair next to her. He placed a thick folder on the table, full of printed papers with colourful graphs, tables, numbers, chemical analyses that to Mary Ann looked like indecipherable hieroglyphs. "Mary Ann, before I show you the results, I need to ask you something very important. Is this child you're caring for in immediate danger?" Like now today at this very moment. I'm not sure about immediate danger, but he's definitely in medium and long-term danger. Why? What did you discover? Robert opened the folder, pointed to the first graph, and began to explain in a controlled voice but laden with contained indignation. These medications, Marianne, are not what they claim to be on the labels. I did 3 different types of analysis to be absolutely sure before giving you the result. I used spectrophotometry, chromatography, and chemical reaction tests. All point to the same conclusion. There has been deliberate adulteration. The vial that should contain a mild anxiolytic for pediatric use actually contains a heavy sedative for adult use. And not only that, the concentration is increased. It's as if someone had dissolved more active ingredient than normal. A child taking this daily, several times a day, would become completely apathetic, drowsy, without any energy. It would be like being constantly under the effect of light anesthesia. The body would constantly fight just to stay awake. Marianne felt the blood run cold in her veins, a wave of cold rising up her spine. My God, are you absolutely sure? It can't be. A manufacturing error, a faulty batch, something like that. No, Marianne, this isn't an error. A manufacturing error would affect all vials in a batch and would be quickly identified by quality control. This was done on purpose. Someone opened these vials, removed the original pills, replaced them with others. Look here. Robert pointed to another graph. And there's more. The second vial you brought contains a mixture that would never, under any circumstances, be prescribed to a child. It includes 2 different substances that, when combined, can cause severe chemical dependence. And in the long term, we're talking about months or years of continuous use. They can cause irreversible neurological damage, memory problems, difficulty with motor coordination, permanent changes in brain function. Whoever is giving this to this child is not trying to cure or treat him. They are trying to incapacitate him, to destroy him slowly. Robert's words echoed in Marianne's mind like a scream in an endless abyss. Incapacitate. That was exactly it. Helen didn't want Michael to get better. She wanted him to be sick, weak, dependent, controllable. But why? What was the motive behind such cruelty? You need to take this to the authorities, Marianne, to Child Protective Services, to the police. This is child abuse. It's an attempt to cause permanent harm to a child. I know I'll do it, but I need more evidence. I need to understand the motive, and I need to protect the boy first. Go back there now and don't let anyone give him any more of those medicines, even if you have to invent an excuse. This is serious, Marianne. Marianne left the pharmacy with trembling legs and a heart beating so hard it hurt. Now she was sure. Michael was being slowly poisoned, and she had to find out why and how to stop it before it was too late. She returned to the mansion in the Lakeshore district as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. She went straight to Michael's room and found the boy sitting on the bed looking out the window, more alert than she had ever seen him. Hi, Marianne. You took a long time. I missed you. Those simple, sincere words made Marianne's eyes sting again. I missed you too, Mike. And I have news. Good news. You're getting better because you're taking less medicine. And I found out that the medicines aren't what they're supposed to be. Someone switched them. Someone wants you to be sick. Michael looked at her with wide eyes. Aunt Helen? Marianne hesitated. She didn't have concrete proof yet that it was Helen, but who else would it be? I don't know for sure yet, but I will find out, and I will protect you. I promise. The boy extended his small hand, and Marianne held it tightly. At that moment they sealed a silent pact. She would not abandon him. No matter what happened, she would discover the truth and save that boy from the chemical prison he was being held in, and whoever was responsible would pay for it. The days following that devastating discovery at the pharmacy were the most tense and challenging Marianne had ever faced in her entire life. Each morning, she woke with the weight of responsibility crushing her shoulders, knowing that she held not only concrete evidence that Michael was being deliberately harmed, but also the almost impossible mission of protecting him, without revealing what she knew before the right moment. She couldn't. Simply confront Helen without thinking of the consequences. The woman was powerful, rich, well-connected socially. She had expensive lawyers at her disposal, influential friends in important positions. She could easily turn the situation around, accuse Marianne of incompetence or even of tampering with the medications. The word of a poor nanny from the East End against the word of a respected socialite from the Lakeshore district. Whom would society and justice believe first? So Marianne made a strategic and careful decision. She needed more than just the lab reports. She needed to fully understand the motive behind such calculated cruelty. And most importantly, she needed to make direct contact with Michael's father, the businessman Edward Miller, who traveled all over the country overseeing his companies and was rarely home when his son needed him most. Because if there was one person who had both the legal power and the emotional motivation to truly protect Michael, it was his own father. But how to do it without Helen noticing and interfering in the process? During that crucial week, Marianne continued to secretly reduce Michael's medication doses with even greater care, always attentively observing every small reaction of the boy, every change in behavior, every sign of improvement. And the results were more impressive and at the same time more painful to witness each day. Michael was not sick. He was never truly sick. He was just a completely normal and healthy child who had been chemically kidnapped from his own life, imprisoned in his own body by heavy drugs he didn't need. On the 5th day since she began drastically reducing the medications, Michael woke up early in the morning without needing to be cooled, which hadn't happened in months. When Marianne entered the room at 6, in the morning as usual, she found the boy sitting on the edge of the enormous bed, swinging his thin legs in the air with a contained energy, a vitality that was slowly returning like water filling an empty glass. His eyes were noticeably brighter. Color was slowly returning to his cheeks, which had been pale as paper, and there was a visible energy there, a genuine desire to move, to do things, to live, that was being repressed only by the constant fear that Helen would notice the dramatic change and take steps to reverse the progress. "Good morning, Marianne," he said with a genuine and radiant smile that lit up his entire small, thin face. "I'm feeling so different today. It's like I've been asleep for a very, very long time, like whole years, and I'm finally truly waking up for the first time. My legs aren't heavy as lead anymore. My head isn't full of cotton anymore. I can think straight again. Remember things that happened. Remember what it was like before I became like this." "That's absolutely wonderful, Mike. But remember our important agreement. When Aunt Helen is around, you need to keep pretending that you're still very tired and sleepy. You can't show too much energy or eagerness. It's not safe yet because if she notices you're getting better so quickly, she'll get suspicious and might increase your medication dosage again. Do you understand why this is so important?" "I understand perfectly, yes, I'll pretend very well. I can do that without a problem. I'm even good at pretending, you know. I've been pretending for a long time that I don't care when she says horrible things about my mum, that I don't mind being locked in this room all day, that I don't miss playing outside in the garden where I used to run. I can pretend a little longer, for as long as it takes." The impressive and sad maturity of that answer, coming from a boy of just 7 years, broke Marianne's heart into 1,000 small, sharp pieces. No child should ever have to develop such sophisticated emotional survival skills so early in life. No child should have to hide who they truly were, repress their own personality, just to protect themselves from an adult who should be caring for them with love and dedication. That afternoon, as Helen left for another of her endless social engagements, a charity lunch at the exclusive club she frequented, Marianne seized the precious opportunity. She knew she had at most 3 hours before the woman returned. She needed to be extremely quick and efficient. She silently went down to Edward's private office on the 1st floor, a room she had not yet entered because Helen had made it absolutely clear from day one that it was forbidden territory for all household staff. The door was locked, but Marianne, after discreetly searching, found the spare key ring hanging on a hook. Inside the kitchen cabinet, each key labeled with small organized lettering. She opened the office door with hands visibly trembling from nervousness and anxiety and entered Edward Miller's private sanctuary. It was a completely different environment from the rest of the cold, impersonal, lifeless house. There was human warmth there, memories, history, framed photographs in silver picture frames scattered across the enormous polished mahogany desk. Edward genuinely smiling next to a small boy of about 3, both covered in sand on a sunny beach. The same boy a little older, perhaps 5, sitting proudly on the broad shoulders of a man whose hair was starting to grey, a wide smile and eyes full of paternal love. A beautiful woman with long brown hair and kind, gentle eyes, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a light blue blanket. The first wife, Michael's biological mother, the happy family that existed before. There were no photographs of Helen, not a single image of the second wife. Mary Ann found this extremely revealing and significant. Edward kept the precious memories of the true family he had before, the happy and loving family. And he had consciously removed any visual reminder of his new wife from the most intimate and personal space he possessed. She quickly but carefully sifted through the papers, organized on the spacious desk, desperately looking for something that could help her make contact. She found appointment diaries, complex business contracts, impressive financial documents, and then in a corner almost hidden under a pile of reports, she found exactly what she was looking for. A simple and elegant business card with the name Edward Miller printed in sober letters, the impressive title of CEO of 6 different companies listed below, and on the back, handwritten in blue pen in a firm, masculine script, a personal cell phone number completely different from the one printed on the professional card. Mary Ann took her old cell phone from her pants pocket and dialed the number with fingers that trembled so much she had to try 3 times before getting it right. The phone rang 4 long times before someone finally answered. The male voice on the other end of the line was deep, naturally authoritative, tired, slightly impatient. "Hello, who is this? This number is private." "Mr. Edward Miller, please, I'm so sorry to disturb you like this without warning. My name is Mary Ann Peterson. I am the nanny hired to care for your son Michael. I urgently need to speak with you about something very serious and delicate, directly related to his well-being and health." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end. Mary Ann almost thought he had abruptly hung up, offended by her audacity. But then the voice returned, now visibly more attentive, more focused, laden with paternal concern. "Michael? Has something serious happened to Michael? Has he had a serious crisis? Helen called me last night saying he was stable and well cared for." "No, sir, he hasn't had any crisis. In fact, that's exactly what I urgently need to talk to you about. About these crises your son supposedly has frequently. About the serious health problems he has supposedly suffered from for so long. Mr. Miller, I have very strong reasons to believe, and I also have concrete laboratory evidence to confirm, that Michael is not actually sick, that he is being deliberately over-medicated with medicines that have been intentionally tampered with, and that all of this is being done in a calculated way to keep him artificially debilitated and dependent." Another silence, much longer, and denser this time. Mary Ann could hear Edward's heavy breathing on the other end, imagined the man processing shocking information, trying to understand, fighting against disbelief. When he spoke again, his voice was completely different. Lower, dangerously controlled, laden with something that could be intense anger or deep fear, perhaps both simultaneously. "What exactly are you suggesting, Miss Peterson? Choose your words very carefully." "Mr. Miller, I am not suggesting anything. I am stating with absolute certainty, based on professional laboratory chemical analyses I had done through a trusted pharmacist, that the medications your son has been taking daily for the past few months, probably even years, are not the medicines listed on the vials labels. They have been deliberately replaced with extremely heavy sedatives for adult use only, dangerous chemical substances that cause severe dependence, and that in the long term, over months or years of continuous use, can cause completely irreversible neurological damage. And since I secretly began reducing the doses without anyone in the house knowing, Michael has improved dramatically. He is alert as I haven't seen him in a long time, talking normally, showing a desire to play and live. Mr. Miller, your son, does not have any serious psychiatric illness. He never did. He is being systematically poisoned." The word poisoned came out of Edward's mouth like a choked cry, full of pain and horror. "Poisoned? My son is being poisoned? By whom? Are you accusing anyone specific of doing this? Say the name now." Marianne took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she possessed. This could go terribly wrong. It could destroy everything. But there was no turning back. "Mr. Miller, please answer me sincerely. Who is the person who completely controls all of Michael's medication? Who takes him alone to all medical appointments? Who personally administers all the medicines every single day without exception? Who has free and unrestricted access to the vials and every opportunity in the world to tamper with them without being seen or questioned?" The silence that followed was so heavy and dense that Marianne felt it physically, as if the air had become solid and suffocating. She heard Edward's increasingly heavy and irregular breathing on the other end of the line, perfectly imagined, the successful and powerful man processing the terrible information, mentally making the painful connections he didn't want to make, inevitably reaching a conclusion that broke his heart into thousands of sharp pieces. When he finally spoke again, after almost a full minute of absolute silence, his voice was completely hoarse, broken, laden with a pain that cut like a blade. "Helen, you're telling me that my own wife is poisoning my son, the woman I married, whom I trusted completely. Mr. Miller, I don't have absolute and definitive proof that it is she personally who is doing the adulteration of the medications, but I have all the evidence that the medications were indeed tampered with by someone. I have the complete laboratory, reports safely stored, and I have my documented testimony that Michael visibly improves when he doesn't take the medicines and drastically worsens when he does. You need to come home immediately. You need to see your son with your own eyes, talk to him personally, and make urgent decisions about how to adequately protect him from this situation." "Where are you right now? Are you still in the house?" "Yes, sir. I'm in your private office. Mrs. Helen has gone out for a social engagement and shouldn't be back before 5 in the afternoon. Don't say absolutely anything to her about this conversation. Do not confront her in any way. Don't let her realize that you know anything. Continue acting normally as if nothing has changed. I will immediately cancel all my business engagements for the next few days and take the first available flight back to London. I should arrive there around 8 o'clock tonight. We can talk calmly and in detail then, away from her. Do you physically have this evidence you mentioned?" "Yes, sir, I do. The complete printed laboratory reports, photographs of the hidden empty vials I found, detailed notes on all of Michael's positive progress in recent days since I reduced the medication. Keep absolutely everything in an extremely safe place where she can never find it. And Marianne?" His voice softened, laden with genuine emotion. "Thank you very, very much for taking such good care of my son, for noticing and investigating what I, as an absent and overly trusting father, should have noticed a long time ago. You saved my boy. It wasn't your fault, Mr. Miller. You were physically absent because you trusted the wrong people to care for those you loved most. That's not a character flaw. But now, you need to be truly present and protect him with all your strength. I will be present, that I solemnly promise. For his mother's memory, I will fix this." Marianne hung up the phone and stood there in the silent office, her legs wobbly as jelly, her heart beating so erratically and strongly that it hurt in her chest. She had done it. She had finally taken the first concrete and decisive step to truly save Michael once and for all. But she had also put absolutely everything at risk. If Helen found out before his father arrived, if she somehow realized that Marianne knew too much, the consequences could be absolutely terrible and unpredictable. She meticulously cleaned any minimal sign that she had touched the objects on the table, put each paper back exactly as it was, returned the key to the kitchen cabinet, and quickly went upstairs to be with Michael and protect him. She found the boy lying on the bed drawing with concentration, using the colored pencils she had secretly managed for him days ago. The drawing showed with childish but heartfelt strokes a smiling boy and a tall man holding hands in a flowery garden, a huge yellow sun shining in the sky, colorful birds flying free. It was a pure image of hope, of a better future that perhaps, just perhaps, was about to finally come true. Marianne sat carefully beside him on the bed and said softly, almost whispering, "Mike, I have very good news for you. Your dad is coming to see you tonight, and you'll finally be able to talk to him properly. Tell him absolutely everything you're feeling, everything you've kept to yourself in your heart for so long." Michael dropped the colored pencil and looked at Mary Ann with wide eyes, bright with intense emotion that threatened to overflow. "Really? Daddy's really coming? Is he really going to listen to me this time? Will he believe me?" "Yes, my dear. He promised he would listen carefully to everything. And guess what else? You won't have to take those horrible medicines that make you sick anymore. You'll be able to be a real child again. Play, run, jump, go to school, and meet other children. Have real friends. Live a normal and happy life as you deserve." Thick, warm tears began to stream freely down Michael's still, thin face, wetting his cheeks that already showed more color, and he impulsively threw himself into Mary Ann's open arms, sobbing softly against her shoulder, letting out all the pain, all the fear, all the accumulated loneliness. She hugged him with all her strength, feeling his small body tremble intensely, letting all the stored anguish finally release after so long repressed. They cried together there, held tightly, from deep sadness for what had been cruelly stolen from him, and from bright hope for what could still be beautifully recovered and rebuilt. The following hours dragged on with an absolutely torturous slowness. Helen returned punctually at 5, as Mary Ann had predicted, and she had to make a superhuman effort to act completely normally, to show no visible nervousness, to follow the mechanical routine exactly as if absolutely nothing had changed in the world. She gave Michael only a minimal third of the prescribed doses, as she had been consistently doing in recent days, and secretly kept the rest of the pills hidden deep in her pants pocket. Helen noticed absolutely nothing different. She was visibly distracted, completely engrossed in her expensive phone, making multiple animated calls to friends in the same social circle, laughing loudly and falsely at jokes Mary Ann couldn't quite hear or didn't want to understand. When the digital clock struck exactly 8 o'clock at night, Mary Ann heard the unmistakable sound of a car arriving and stopping at the entrance. She discreetly looked through the wide window of Michael's room and saw an ordinary taxi stopping in front of the mansion's imposing gate. A tall, imposing man with broad shoulders and a naturally authoritative posture, well-cut grey hair in an executive style, wearing a good-quality navy blue suit but visibly crumpled from travel, got out of the vehicle with a small executive briefcase in his right hand. Edward Miller had finally returned home, to face the truth, to protect his son. Mary Ann's heart began to beat much faster, almost painfully. This was the crucial and decisive moment. Everything depended absolutely on how the inevitable conversation would unfold, on Edward being able to believe her, despite knowing her for so little time, on having the necessary courage to face the devastating truth about the woman he had married only 2 years ago. She clearly heard Edward's deep, grave voice downstairs formally greeting Helen. Her voice sounded visibly surprised, almost irritated by the interruption of her plans. "Edward, darling, I didn't know you were coming back today. You didn't tell me in advance. I thought you'd be traveling for another week. Sudden, last-minute change of plans. I urgently needed to resolve some important things here. Where is Michael now?" "In his room as always, resting as he should be. He's already taken all his mandatory evening medication on time. The doctor recommended he not be disturbed after being medicated. Even so, I want to see him immediately now." Heavy, determined footsteps quickly ascending the stairs. Voices, getting closer and closer. Mary Ann nervously stood up, smoothed her hair with trembling hands and waited, holding Michael's small hand tightly. The bedroom door opened forcefully, and Edward Miller entered with long strides, with Helen following close behind, her expression visibly displeased and suspicious. Edward was indeed an imposing and impressive man. He must have been in his well-lived 50s, tall, about 6 feet 1 inch, still strong and fit despite his age and sedentary executive life, with deep, intelligent brown eyes that were now completely fixed on his son, sitting on the large bed. Michael looked at the father he rarely saw, and something completely transformed his still small, thin face. His eyes lit up like stars. A genuine, radiant smile appeared, transforming his entire expression. "Daddy," he said, his voice coming out much firmer and fuller of life than Mary Ann had ever heard since she arrived. "You finally came home, you came back to me." Edward crossed the entire room in just 3 long, determined strides and hugged his son with a physical and emotional intensity that made it absolutely clear how much true love was there. Deep and genuine love that was being tragically wasted by constant absence, by blind and naive trust, by a terrible lack of attention to important details. "Michael, my beloved son, my boy, let me look at you properly." He pulled back just a little, holding his small face with extreme care between his large, calloused hands. "You're different from what I remembered, much more alert, more present, more alive." "I really am feeling better, Daddy. Much, much better than I've felt in a long time." Edward turned and looked directly at Mary Ann, and there was immense genuine gratitude in his brown eyes, mixed with deep sadness, heavy guilt, and growing anger. "You're Mary Ann, the courageous nanny who called me earlier?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Then I urgently need to speak with you, privately, right now." Edward looked coldly at Helen, and his tone changed completely to something distant and formal. "Darling, I'd like to have a moment completely alone with the nanny. These are technical and professional matters concerning Michael's detailed care routine, specific medical issues." Helen's expression visibly and dangerously hardened. Her clear blue eyes flashed with intense suspicion and thinly veiled anger. "I should absolutely be present for any discussion involving my stepson's medical treatment. I insist. These are confidential matters of professional procedure. Just 5 quick minutes, then we'll call you. Please wait comfortably in the living room." Helen left the room with stiff, angry steps, her high heels clacking loudly and menacingly on the expensive wooden floor, her anger and suspicion increasingly undisguised in her tense posture. As soon as the heavy door closed completely behind her, Edward immediately turned to Mary Ann with urgency. "Show me absolutely everything now. All the evidence you mentioned, everything you discovered without exception." Mary Ann quickly retrieved the thick folder she had kept carefully hidden under her own narrow bed on the 3rd floor and handed it with trembling hands to Edward. He read the detailed laboratory reports with growing and visibly shocked attention, his jaw becoming increasingly tense and clenched, his large hands trembling slightly with contained anger. When he finished reading the last document, he looked at his son with eyes intensely welled up with tears he refused to let fall. "Michael, is everything written here really true? Were you really feeling very sick specifically because of these medicines they were giving you?" Michael nodded his small head, his own eyes shining wetly. "I tried to tell you many times, Daddy, but you were always traveling far away, always busy, and Aunt Helen always said I was making things up, that I was a difficult and problematic child, that I absolutely needed all the medicines to get better and be well." Edward closed his eyes tightly, clenching his large fists until his knuckles turned completely white. The pain on his mature, marked face was absolutely palpable, real, physical. Mary Ann felt deep pity for that powerful man who was discovering in the worst possible way that he had miserably failed his son when he most desperately needed him. "Mr. Miller, what do you intend to do now?" Mary Ann asked in a firm but gentle voice. "I'm going to confront her directly. I'm going to find out the complete truth, and I'm going to end this disastrous marriage immediately today, no matter the financial or social cost. My son comes first. He always should have come first." Edward stood up with determination, kissed Michael's sweaty forehead with infinite tenderness, and said in an absolutely firm and decisive voice, "Stay here, safe with Mary Ann, my son. Daddy is going to resolve this once and for all now. And I solemnly promise, for your mother's memory, that I will never again allow anyone to harm you in any way." The conversation that took place in the luxurious living room lasted more than 2 intense hours. Mary Ann and Michael stayed in the room embracing, listening to the distant sounds of raised voices, occasional shouts, doors slamming. At one point they clearly heard Helen screaming about lawyers and lawsuits. Edward replied in a controlled but firm voice that she could call all the expensive lawyers she wanted, but she would never see a penny beyond what was agreed in the divorce because he had concrete evidence of child abuse. When Edward finally returned to the room, his face was tired but determined. Helen will leave this house tomorrow morning. I've already called my lawyer. The divorce proceedings begin immediately. She didn't admit it directly, but she also couldn't convincingly deny it in the face of the laboratory evidence. And she involuntarily confessed that she had serious financial problems before marrying me, that she desperately needed money, and that she believed that by controlling you through supposed special medical needs, she would have permanent access to the family's resources. It was about money then, Mary Ann murmured. It was always just about money and inheritance. Edward nodded heavily. My son is heir to a considerable fortune that includes businesses, properties, investments. If he were declared incapacitated, financial guardianship would automatically fall to his stepmother until he reached adulthood. It was a long-term, cold, and calculated plan. He looked at Michael, with tears finally falling. Forgive me, son, for not seeing, for not being here when you needed me. You're here now, Daddy. That's what really matters. The following months were a slow but constant and beautiful reconstruction. Helen left the mansion the next day, carrying only her personal bags escorted by security guards, without looking back once. The divorce was finalized quickly when Edward presented all the evidence of what she had done, and she accepted a minimal settlement just to prevent the case from becoming public, and her reputation from being completely destroyed in the social circles she so valued. Michael was immediately taken to true and reliable doctors who confirmed that he was a completely healthy child. With the cessation of heavy medication, gentle psychological support to process the trauma, adequate nutrition, light exercise and, especially a lot of love and attention, he began to flourish like a plant finally receiving sun after years in the shade. 3 months later, Michael was unrecognizable. He ran through the garden laughing loudly, played football with his father every afternoon, attended an excellent school where he quickly made friends. Color had completely returned to his face. His formerly skeletal body gained healthy weight. His eyes shone with genuine life and joy. And Mary Ann remained there throughout this beautiful transformation. Edward insisted that she stay, no longer as a nanny, but as an essential part of the family. You saved my son, Mary Ann. You saved my family. You deserve much more than I can offer. Over time, as they cared for Michael together, something unexpected but natural began to blossom between Mary Ann and Edward. Long conversations after Michael slept, shared coffees on quiet mornings, glances that lingered a little longer, smiles that meant more than they should, a genuine connection based on mutual respect, shared values, and love for the same special boy. A year after that fateful night, Edward asked Mary Ann to marry him during a simple dinner in the garden, where Michael now played freely and happily. It wasn't grand or ostentatious. It was sincere, real, full of true love. Mary Ann accepted, crying with happiness, and Michael jumped into her arms, shouting that he finally had the mother he always wanted. The wedding was a small and beautiful ceremony, only close family and true friends. Michael was the page boy, wearing a small suit and a huge smile. During the vows, Edward publicly thanked Mary Ann for saving not only Michael, but himself, for teaching him what truly mattered in life. 5 years have passed since then. The family grew with the arrival of a beautiful girl whom Michael adores. The boy, now 12 years old and completely healthy, decided he wants to be a pediatrician to help other children who may be going through difficult situations like he did. Mary Ann, who finally managed to pay for all of her mother's treatment, who is now in complete remission, divides her time between caring for the family she loves and volunteering at support centers for at-risk children. Edward drastically reduced his travels, prioritizing being present for every important moment. Family dinners, football games in the garden, conversations before bed, simple but love-filled vacations. He learned that presence is worth more than any fortune, and it all began because a young nanny from the East End, desperate for a job but guided by genuine compassion, had the courage to see what no one else wanted to see, to question, to investigate, to risk everything to save a child she barely knew but who had deeply touched her heart. Today, when Mary Ann looks at Michael running happily through the garden, at her little daughter playing in the sand, at Edward smiling beside her, she knows that every moment of fear and uncertainty was absolutely worth it. Because love, when true and courageous, always triumphs over evil. Always. End of story. Dear listeners, we deeply hope that the story of Mary Ann, Michael, and Edward has touched your heart in a special way. If you were moved by this journey of courage, love, and family reconstruction, please like this video, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any stories, and tell us in the comments what part marked you the most and why. Was it Mary Ann's courageous discovery, Michael's beautiful transformation, the love that blossomed from tragedy? We want to know your sincere opinion. Every day we bring intense and emotional stories like this, which reveal the deepest, truest, and most inspiring side of the human soul and family relationships. We already have many other stories waiting for you. We eagerly await you in the next episode. A big hug from the entire team, and always remember, the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult, can change lives forever.